Low Carbon London is a low carbon network fund project, and we can perhaps talk a little bit more about how that works during the discussion session. But it's very much a learning journey. This is UK Power Networks' initiative in terms of learning how a smart grid can be developed in a practical way. Incidentally, I don't have smart in my role title, but it seems that the word future has exactly the same impact in terms of the number of telephone calls and emails I get. Okay, so Low Carbon London, as I say, it's learning how to create a smart low carbon city. Presentation basically is in two parts. I'm going to take you through the background to the project and then go into more detail in terms of the actual objectives of the project itself. The first question is why London? Why not Cambridge? You may well have asked. And I can sort of nip that one in the bud by saying that our second year submission into the Low Carbon Network Fund competitive part of the fund is based on Cambridge-Norfolk border. So maybe next year I'll come back and talk about that particular project. But there are some compelling reasons actually for choosing London. And I'll just briefly go through those now. First and foremost, London's contribution to the UK economy. Almost worryingly, I think you could say that 21% of gross value added is generated from London. Now, if you look at this particular chart, what this is showing is the relative contributions from the sub-regions across UK. And you can see there's not a huge difference actually between the top five and the bottom five, except when you look at the very top, which is inner London. This is just inner London, which generates twice the GVA of the next largest sub-region. Now, why is this relevant to smart grids? Well, I think the point's already been made this morning that it's not just about low carbon, it's also about economy and security. If we're going to deliver smart grids, it's got to be in a way which delivers affordable and secure electricity supplies. And there's nowhere where that's more important than in London. If you characterise London, you could say certainly in the East, Canary Wharf, and in the central area, it's very much driven by financial services. As you move to the west, it's more culture and tourism. But there's nothing indigenous about financial services. If we can't offer a secure and affordable electricity supply, there's no reason why those investment banks and all the associated service companies wouldn't relocate somewhere else in the world. So very important that we can do smart grids in an affordable and secure way. Secondly, perhaps the most compelling reason in a carbon context is where does the carbon dioxide actually come from? Now, this is a map showing the carbon dioxide emission densities across UK, and as you would expect, the majority of the landmass is fairly benign in terms of the emissions being in the range of 0 to 10 kilotons of CO2 per kilometre squared. As you move into the conurbations, Manchester, Birmingham, Tyneside and London, obviously you tend to see that those emission densities increase. And in fact, as you get towards the centre of those conurbations, it increases exponentially. Right in the centre of London, if you look at the inset there, in the central area, you're talking emission densities of 150 to 550 thousands of tonnes of CO2 per kilometre squared. So I think what the message here is very clearly, if you're serious about carbon dioxide reduction, then you need to focus on the conurbations, and London is the most obvious conurbation to make a start with. If you actually look at that red area right in the middle of London, the central area, and if I expand that in terms of the network infrastructure, each one of these areas that you see on here is served by a major substation. So that would be typically a 132 to 11 kV substation, or some of the smaller ones, 33 to 11 kV. I say smaller ones, they're still 60 MVA capacity. The 132 to 11 kV substations are 180 MVA capacity. But what this is showing is that if we did nothing by way of investment between now and the end of the current price control period, all of the areas that you see red, all of the substations that you see in red there, would be at or above firm capacity. Now, I probably just need to explain the concept of firm capacity. That doesn't mean to say the lights are about to go out, but what it would mean is if we were above firm capacity and we had an outage at the wrong time of day, at the wrong time of year, then we could be in a situation where we had a deficit in capacity and potentially load shedding. Now, needless to say, we're not going to do no investment over the current 5-year period. We're going to do a great deal of investment to correct that situation. But it just shows the context of London. It's a very highly utilised network, and therefore one where we need to focus our attention in terms of how smartly we deal with those sort of levels of utilisation. But going forward, the load growth continues, notwithstanding there was a theoretical recession, but none of these projects stopped as a result of that recession. So, for example, we've got 3 structures there which are about to come on stream: Heron Tower and the Pinnacle near Liverpool Street Station. If you go into Liverpool Street, you'll see those. And near to London Bridge, the Shard, which will be the tallest building in Europe when it's completed. The point about these is that each one of these is presenting a new demand on our network, which is equivalent of a small town, but in the size of a building plot. So, you know, contributing to very, very high demand densities in the central area. And the issue with that is, if we try to do reinforcement in a conventional way, it gets very, very expensive. The infrastructure corridors are saturated. Basically, there's no room in the pavements, there's no room in the footpaths, or indeed the roads. So we're already into a substantial tunnel infrastructure in London, rivalling the London Underground system, in order to lay new cables where we need to do that, high voltage cables. And we're talking £4 million per kilometre typically for a cable route in a tunnel. Also, establishing new substations are very, very problematic because of the congestion, and so we're into multi-level underground major substations, which are an order of magnitude more expensive than an equivalent substation, say, in Cambridge would be. On top of that, the London Mayor has some very ambitious plans on decentralised generation. In fact, the target is that by 2025, 25% of all energy will be from decentralised sources in London. That's heat and electricity. And there's some analysis that backs this up, and the implications are we're going to see a lot more embedded generation coming onto our networks, particularly in the form of CHP, CCHP, but even some wind power as well. You may think London would be divorced of any connection with wind in the central area, but there is a building near Elephant and Castle which actually has wind turbines built into its infrastructure. Works on the Venturi principle, apparently. Over and above that, electric vehicles has already been mentioned. Boris Johnson is keen that London is the electric vehicle capital of Europe, and to that end you can read the London Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Strategy, which talks of 25,000 publicly available electric vehicle charging posts by 2015. So this is a bit the chicken and egg thing that was referred to at the beginning of this morning. You're not going to buy electric vehicles unless you're confident there's an infrastructure there, but equally you're not going to invest in the infrastructure unless you know the electric vehicles are going to come along. So what this is doing is catalysing that situation by putting public money into providing that essential infrastructure. But of course electric vehicles do cause additional demands on our network. So that's the background to why we chose London. I think some fairly compelling reasons there. What we're learning on this project will be applicable to all urban centres, but it's likely to happen in London more quickly than elsewhere, therefore the learning opportunity will be there. The project is very much about building bridges with communities and local government. I think it's already been said, you can't do a smart grid on your own. This is not a project we're doing to London, it's a project we're doing with London. So we're working with real communities and local government stakeholders. The LDA, of course, is being wound down, but its activities are being subsumed into the Greater London Authority. So working with the Mayor of London, Institute for Sustainability. And what we're doing is working with London communities, actually going into the communities with the GLA's initiatives. There's some major programmes, the retrofit programme, the renew programme. Boris Johnson announced a major increase in investment in those areas at the Base London event yesterday. So this is about retrofitting homes, public buildings and local businesses with low carbon energy efficiency measures. From our point of view, it's enabling new low carbon technologies such as electric vehicles, heat pumps and decentralised generation. and fundamentally exploring the most efficient way of running the electricity grid in the future. But it's not just about communities, it's working with customers as well. So working with our partners, EDF Energy, supplier, Eneloc and Flexitricity, who are commercial aggregators, we're establishing smart meters, time of use tariffs, and electricity demand management solutions. So rewarding customers who are prepared to manage consumption at times of peak demand. And Stuart referred to potentially 10% peak demand shift, which would be very, very useful to a network operator. But also enabling real reductions in energy bills, which of course is important for customers. But also offering some commercially innovative contracts with industrial and commercial customers and generators. And I'm going to say a little bit more about that later in the presentation. We are incidentally talking to another major supplier. I'm not at liberty to say who, but we're very hopeful that one other of the big six will be joining this project in the not too distant future. But in the meantime, we have a commitment from EDF Energy to install 5,000 smart meters as soon as they become available. The technical specifications should be drafted in July, and then there will be the EU ratification process. But towards the end of this year and then the first half of next year, we expect to install 5,000 smart meters in the London communities to start with the customer engagement and start to understand what sort of benefits we can get from smart metering and more importantly what sort of benefits the customers can gain. Where we're doing that is principally in the Mayor's designated low carbon zones, which are these areas that you see here. This is where the bulk of the retrofit and renew programs are being focused. So there's a lot of customer engagement going on already, and smart meters going on the back of that will help hopefully to encourage customers to participate in this project. They will be invited to, they won't be forced to, but they'll be invited to participate in this project so we can monitor electricity consumption, introduce time of use tariffs, see what impact that has. Not just in the central area, also to the east of London, where if you like, the bulk of the brownfield development is going on, the Olympic Park, for example, Thames Gateway, where there's already some major projects taking place. So this is another focus area for the project. Why we're interested in electric vehicle charging, I'm not going to say too much about this because I know Alan Higginson and I think Martin Pollock is going to say a bit more about this today. But fundamentally what we're trying to do is to avoid the scenario that you see on the left-hand side and encourage the one that you see on the right-hand side. So this, very briefly, is showing the impact that would occur if electric vehicles, and we're talking about high penetrations now of electric vehicles, did what I would do, naturally, come home from work and plug my vehicle in to get it recharged so it's ready for the following morning. The impact you would see then is what you see on the bottom chart, the bottom left chart, a sudden increment in peak demand round about 6 o'clock where the network already peaks. Perhaps more relevant to central London would be the upper left-hand chart, which is what would happen if everybody charged their vehicle when they got to work. Again, we see a virtual doubling of the peak demand being imposed on that part of the network. If, however, we were able to use the window of opportunity to optimise that charging, then what you have is on the right-hand side. So bear in mind those vehicles at work are stationary for most of the day. If you could optimise electric vehicle charging, you could accommodate all of that consumption with only a small increment in peak demand. Similarly, with home charging, the vehicles are stationary overnight. From when you get home in the evening, or at least if you have teenage children, they may need a taxi service at 1 o'clock in the morning. But apart from that, for the most part, you've got a large window of opportunity there. And the objective really is to see how close we can get to that optimised situation. I mentioned embedded generators, and Stuart referred to it as well. Two things embedded generators can do is they can cause us problems with fault levels, and that certainly is an issue in central London. But they can also provide network support. And if we can contract those generators to constrain them on when we need network support, that can help us to avoid network reinforcement. Similarly, if we can constrain them off by some mutually agreeable bilateral agreement when we have a network constraint, that can also help us to connect that generation at a more economic rate. So we're working very hard with established generators now, particularly CHP generators, to see what extent we can gain their contractual support for network support. Particularly interesting area is responsive demand, and this is where we're working with our aggregators on with industrial and commercial customers. If I can just explain this chart to you, what the blue chart is showing is the actual demand profile of a major substation. This is one of our 60 MVA substations across a year. The sawtooth effect is due to weekends. The load drops off at the weekends. But you can see apart from that, it's fairly flat over the year and actually peaks during the summer. This is characteristic of central London. The problem from our point of view is in terms of if it's a 60 MVA substation, it means the firm capacity is 45 MVA. That's because there are 4 15 MVA transformers. So if we lose one of them due to an unplanned outage, we've got 45 MVA nominal capacity left. So we have an N-1 capability. And you can see in the winter, because the ambient temperature is so much lower, we can overrate those transformers. We can get more than 45 MVA out of those 3 transformers. But in the summer, we are down to 45 MVA. And you can see a scenario there where the peak demand could exceed that 45 MVA firm capacity at certain times. Now, for the reasons I explained earlier, to deal with that through conventional reinforcement, you could be talking tens of millions of pounds and a lot of disruption to actually carry out that reinforcement. But if we can contract with I&C customers to respond only if we have an outage at the wrong time, so this is not something they'll be doing continuously, only under those certain circumstances, if they can respond quickly, reduce demand by a couple of megawatts for a few hours, that can get us over that peak and enable us to avoid that network reinforcement. More importantly, this is a service that is also very valuable to National Grid in terms of short-term operating reserve, so we can leverage the synergies, leverage the opportunities for the whole system, not just for the distribution network. And we have our first contract in place already. This project started in January. We've got our first contract in place and many more to come. One area we're exploring is what is going to be the impact of large-scale wind generation. The prediction is that by 2020 that we will have around 30 gigawatts of wind generation, maybe by 2030 40 gigawatts. But this is some modelling that was done by Poiré to show what the impact in terms of intermittency, in terms of variability of that wind generation might be. And what you can see from that is not only significant day-on-day variations in wind output, but also some very, very rapid ramp rates within day as well. And the impact that can have on spot price of electricity is what you see on the bottom chart. So very steep spikes, but also some negative prices as well. From our point of view, we need to understand as a network operator what the impact of this would be if that price volatility is reflected in tariffs that are offered to customers. Now, I'm not suggesting domestic customers will be subject to this sort of level of risk, but I believe suppliers will need to, through time of use tariffs, try to reflect some of that risk back onto customers. And in a scenario where if you'd had very little wind throughout the day, but then a big increase in wind output round about times of peak demand at 6 o'clock, the modelling suggests we would have an artificial increment on our peak demand we see on our network. So we're going to be introducing wind-following tariffs with some customers to see to what extent we can encourage demand to follow the availability of wind generation and understand what the impact on our distribution network. Key to all of this is learning. This is not something we're doing just for our own benefit. We want to share this learning with other network operators, and then not just network operators, but the whole industry, so suppliers, aggregators, National Grid, who are a key partner. And we're doing that through Imperial College London. They will be the learning laboratory. They will be analysing the results of all the trials that they do, all the trials that we do, extrapolating the results that we get. So, for example, if we see a certain result with half a dozen electric vehicles on the network, what would the impact be if you had 60 or 100 electric vehicles? So they'll be doing that extrapolation to show what the impact would be. So lots of dissemination, a website and events that we'll be participating in and sponsoring to make sure that learning is embedded across the whole industry. I'm not going to go through this one in detail, you'll be pleased to know, but it's just to illustrate the fact that it's just not conceptual. There is some real ICT infrastructure going in to support all of this. So we have a smart meter regime, we have a head-end solution provided by Logica, we have the electric vehicle monitoring, generation through smarter grid solutions, the commercial aggregators working with the I&C customers, and all of that information feeding into the head end and the operational data store, then the analysis being undertaken by Imperial College, wind twinning tariffs, as I mentioned, the impact of wind following tariffs. All of that learning is being captured and disseminated through the learning laboratory. So just to summarise, what we're trying to do, it's really an emulation of the future challenges that we believe urban electricity networks will face. So trying to model today, through real initiatives on a live network, what the future impact will be. But it's very much working with stakeholders to deliver their carbon emission reduction targets as well, through energy efficiency, electrification of heat and transport and so on. Partnering with National Grid and energy suppliers, commercial aggregators to explore commercial innovation. This is very much around commercial innovation enabled by technology. That's the thrust of what this programme is about. And partnering with proven ICT smart grid solution providers like Logica, like Siemens, to make sure we can actually deliver this project. So it's really about integration of commercial innovation and technology. And as I say, with a dedicated learning laboratory, bringing together all the results and sharing them with the rest of the industry. Thank you.